بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أسعد خلقه وختم رسله محمد صلى الله عليه وآله ورضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. We're still with Surah An-Nisa, and there are ayat in this surah that have to do with part of the criminal code or the criminal law in Islam. And in Islam, there is no difference between times of peace and times of war when it comes to the rules that govern the killing of people, because there is no exception for a time of war in order to kill someone who is innocent. This is not an Islamic idea. In fact, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam in one of the wars saw a woman who was killed, and she didn't look like a combatant or a fighter, and he was very angry, and he sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked who killed this woman and why was she killed. She doesn't look like she's a fighter. We are not supposed to kill anyone but those who fight against us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions وَمَا كَانَ لِمُؤْمِنٍ أَن يَقْتُلَ مُؤْمِنًا إِلَّا خَطَأً. A believer cannot kill someone else, a believer, except by mistake. خطأ is mistake. ومن قتل مؤمنا خطأ فتحرير رقبة مؤمنة ودية مسلمة إلى أهله إلا أن يصدقوا. If someone kills someone by mistake, what's called in the legal language manslaughter, then there is a kafara, there is a compensation that the person has to pay, which is freeing a slave, and the diya, or the compensation. They call it blood money, but diya is actually a compensation. Freeing a slave, by the way, still exists in our world. We cannot enslave people anymore. It's actually during the time of the Khulafa al-Rashidin, and it's a bit of a sensitive issue, but it's very important that as Muslims we understand that during the time of Khulafa al-Rashidin, they no longer enslaved people in wars. They made people pay taxes when they had victory over people, and they no longer applied that. Yes, it did apply during the time of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a kind of equal measure, equal punishment in the time of war. But this enslavement at the time of the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not for the sake of rape. Rape is a crime in Islam. Rape is haraba, or the act of war that is punishable by the harshest punishments in Islam. In Islam, the marrying of a slave during the time of the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a form of marriage. فَانْكِحُوهُنَّ بِإِذْنِ أَهْلِهِنَّ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, then marry them, nikah, marriage, in the with the permission of their families and all of that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talk about the marriage of the slaves as nikah, as marriage. And why is it different from the marriage of free women? Because the marriage of a slave means that her mahr is her freedom, her gift, marriage gift is the freedom. And once she has a child, she and the child are free. Slavery is not inherited in Islam. And by the time of the Khulafa al-Rashidin, this system was abolished. It came back during the time of the kingdoms that came after that, and the empires and the kings who actually brought back slavery in the name of Islam. But I take the opinion of the scholars who believe that this was abolished. Yet today we have many slaves, we have millions of slaves around the world, whether because of debts in many countries. When someone cannot pay his debt or her debt, then they become a slave of the person. It happens in many countries, especially poorer countries on the poor side of the world, as well as slavery in terms of kidnapping people and selling them for a price and all of that. And we have a duty as Muslims to combat that and to free the slaves. We cannot own a slave anymore, and we cannot marry a slave anymore. This is not something that we can do. It is abolished, and Islam has an intent to abolish slavery. And I believe it was abolished during the time of the Khulafa al-Rashidin and finished. But we have still a right to free slaves. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks in the Quran about freeing slaves, enslaving people is not legitimate. It's not in the Quran. Yes, it's in the Sunnah, but it's no longer. But uh, but freeing slaves is still valid. and is still available for us to do. And it is our duty, actually, as Muslims, to free these tens of millions of people around the world who are suffering under a system of slavery or the other in this world, and especially in the Muslim lands. We have a responsibility to speak up against that, against especially those girls who are kidnapped and sold in the Muslim land, in some parts of Arabia and other parts. We actually are not supposed to do that as Muslims, and we are supposed to free these slaves. Now, for the one who is killed by mistake, there has to be a compensation for the family. That compensation is so far calculated in the number of camels and so on that used to be at the time of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. I do believe in the ijtihad or the new thinking of some of the scholars that this is no longer, and it is supposed to be a significant amount of money depending on the economy, so that people have providence for life, something that they can sustain for the rest of their lives. In industrial countries, it is calculated as something around $1 million or something. And I believe that this is more fair than paying an amount of a number of camels or something that has to be calculated in the old economies and in the old currencies. This is not how we are supposed to go about the deed. But we should differentiate between two kinds of killing by mistake, which is one of the contributions of the Islamic Sharia and the fiqh in the history of law, which is al-khata or khata al-amd. Al-khata is totally by mistake, like you turn on a switch and the lamp falls on someone and kills it. And you didn't mean to do anything. You meant to turn on the switch. You meant to open the door, or you meant something without any negligence, without any intent of anything. This is the khata that is mentioned in the ayah. But khata al-amd is to have an intent to harm, but not an intent to kill. And in this case, there is a compensation and there could be a judgment in a court by a punishment, but not a capital punishment. The capital punishment in Islam is for the killing by intent. And I do believe in capital punishment as someone who studied law, even in the Western sense. And I know a number of Western philosophers of law also believe in it. So it is arguable. It is not really a matter of human rights from the Islamic point of view, not even from the philosophy of law point of view, despite what media could say or politicians. But it is a matter of dispute amongst scholars of Western law. And in Islam, it's clear. Of course, if you kill with intent, then it is a capital punishment, unless the family of the deceased find an excuse, and then they excuse and there's a compensation. But the negligence or the beating to harm that causes killing, which is what Musa sallallahu alayhi wasallam did in the story that we know in Surah Al-Qasas. فَوَكَزَهُ Musa. Wakaza means to give a fist. So he gave him a fist and the man died. He intended to hurt the man, but not to kill him. And this is a manslaughter of a kind that the Sharia defined that requires compensation, but it does not require a capital punishment or a soul for a soul. And that's why Musa sallallahu alaihi wasallam at that time he said that soul for a soul would be injustice for him because he did not intend to kill the person. In this case, we have to be careful with the differences between killing with intent and killing without intent, and without intent between the total mistake that could be forgivable and could be judged as something that is totally unintended, versus killing by harming someone without intending to kill them, and then they die according to that harm. And that harm, whether you are harming them by just pushing them away in a normal way or whatever, in a fight or something, versus harming them by breaking another law, for example, the traffic law or something, that would be actually more responsibility because you're already breaking another law that is intended to keep the safety of the people in the society. And therefore, we have to have that kind of fiqh. And these nuances are very important in judging that. But in Islam, we have to keep and preserve life in all of its forms, whether in the time of war or the time of peace. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guidance and forgiveness and to give victory to the oppressed. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us to fast in the best way that He subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to fast with. قولوا قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.